This is Raymond Aite, known popularly in Ghana as Ataayi, the brand ambassador of armed robbery in the country. He is currently the longest serving prisoner in the country, Ghana, and also the face of crime in Ghana. When anybody steals, they simply call the person Ataayi. How did it end up being this particular way? What happened? If you were born in the late 90s or early 2000s and you lived in Ghana, then Ataayi is not a name that is strange to you because Ataayi became very popular during the late 90s and early 2000s. How did his life start? Raymond Aite, known popularly in Ghana as Ataayi, was born and raised in Adabraka. He started his preparatory school at a place known as Odoko. His mother was the sole caretaker of Ataayi. So, when Ataayi's mother relocated from Ghana to the United Kingdom, Ataayi became stranded without a caretaker and had to drop out of school. After dropping out of school, Ataayi needed something to cater for himself. He needed to learn a handiwork in order to survive on the streets of Accra. So Ataayi started as a mechanic. During the mechanic, Ataayi graduated into becoming a taxi driver. During his days as a taxi driver, Ataayi was not only skillful at driving. People who encountered him testified that he was a very humble and respectful man. Also, he had so much customer care for his passengers. So the question is, how did such a humble and hardworking taxi driver graduated from this into becoming the face of armed robbery and crime in the country? Well, for your information, Ataayi didn't grow up as a criminal. Neither did he grow up as a stubborn boy or somebody who was fond of breaking the law. Ataayi grew up as a very humble and respectful and hardworking person. So, during his days as a taxi driver, a certain woman contracted Ataayi to drive her from Accra to Ekropon for a funeral. During the way to Ekropon, Ataayi's taxi was involved in a terrible accident. Now, for your information, Ataayi did not own that particular taxi. He was driving it and then giving the money to the owner of the taxi. So after the accident, Ataayi returned from Ekropon to Accra stranded. He had no job because the taxi was completely destroyed, and he was also in debt because the owner of the taxi needed him to repair the taxi. So left with no choice, Ataayi was now roaming around looking for a job until one day a friend of Ataayi introduced Ataayi to a certain man whose name was Eddie. On meeting Eddie at the Flamingo area, Eddie offered Ataayi a job. And what was this job? Ataayi was to be the driver of Eddie and several other men. Now, what were they driving to do? Eddie explained to Ataayi that he was to drive them because they were into car theft and other robberies. At first, Ataayi said no, he wouldn't participate in such thing. However, on a careful thought, Ataayi considered the fact that he had a pregnant woman at home, he had no job and he needed food and other things to survive. So Ataayi came back to Eddie and said, yes, I am in, I want to participate. So it started. Their first robbery was in 1999 where they attacked a certain person and then went away with a sum of 12 million old Ghana cedi. Out of the 12 million that they robbed, Ataayi was given only 1.2 million. So after their first successful robbery in 1999, Ataayi and the gang went on to undertake several other robberies which were also very successful. And now note that at this point they were not using a gun because they didn't have any. So they were looking for a gun so that they could involve themselves in big robberies to make more money. Their luck came when one day they found a gun inside the truck of police. They took this gun and then went away with it. So at this point they were now stopping buses to rob people inside the buses. They were now attacking people inside their stores and several other things, allegedly. So all these robberies and several others were undertaken by Ataayi and his gang. The police did not even know Ataayi at this point. He wasn't popular in the country. All the police knew was that there's a syndicate of criminals in Accra who were attacking and going away with money that belonged to people. So the police made a very conscious effort on cracking down on these criminals. Ataayi's name started becoming popular and the police started making him a target after he and the gang decided to rob a certain woman whose name was Dora Kumi. She owned a very large shop at a place in Accra known as Taifa. Ataayi and the gang decided that they would trail this woman after she had closed from work and then go on and then take her money. Now, to steal the money of Dora Kumi, they needed to come up with a plan. And here is a twist. Ataayi was not even the leader of the gang. The gang had a leader. His name was Eric Frederick Lamte Annan, aka Nambo. So Nambo had a spy. This spy's name was Nyako. Nyako was responsible for spying on Dora Kumi to see whether she had closed and where she was passing home, so they could attack. So there were people on a motorbike behind Dora Kumi, and Ataayi, who was a driver, was also parked in a car in front of Dora Kumi. So those with the motorbike would take the money and then throw it to Ataayi and the others who were in the car, and then they would speed off with the money. Successfully, they were able to steal Dora Kumi's 42 million old Ghana cedis. Now, this is where everything changed for Ataayi and the gang. Dora Kumi reported to the police, and then 2 days later, the police launched a very massive search for the criminals who had taken the money from Dora Kumi. So this time, during the massive search by the police, they were able to arrest some suspects. One of the suspects was Tony Yao Owusu, who upon several interrogations finally admitted to being part of the gang. He mentioned 7 other names of the gang members, of which Ataayi's name was included. It was the first time the police was hearing of the name Ataayi. When Ataayi's name was mentioned, police placed special attention on him. This was because, according to reports, Ataayi was a very skillful driver. During a police chase, Ataayi could drive the car in reverse at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. This helped them all the time to get away from the police anytime they undertook a robbery and there was a police chase. Ataayi and the gang engaged in several robberies and were never arrested. So the public began to believe that Ataayi and the gang had some mystical powers which helped them to evade police arrest. Now, the thing is, they engaged in several robberies. One time, a pastor came out to say that Ataayi and the gang trailed him from the bank where he withdrew some money until he was at the premises of the church. They started firing gunshots and then came to him and then took away his money, which was a sum of 6 million old Ghana cedi. Another man also came out and said that Ataayi and the gang stole from him an amount of over 400 million old Ghana cedi. There were many stories such as this and others about Ataayi robbing and going away with large sums of money. However, they were never arrested. So it was fair to say that yes, they had some mystical powers, but there was no evidence to this. Now, the police, upon being fed up of this syndicate of crimes happening in Accra and the areas around it, ACP Kofi Boaji came out and then they launched a very massive manhunt for these criminals. During this manhunt, several of the gang members were arrested and others lost their life during a gun battle with the police. Ataayi, again, in this particular moment, were able to run away from the police. So after the massive manhunt by the police led by ACP Kofi Boaji, which resulted in the deaths of several gang members and arrest of the remaining, Ataayi at this point had no other option than to lay low, to be low-key. So Ataayi decided to go and hide at the sister's house, which was located in Teshi, Nungua, in the greater Accra region. Now, at this point, Ataayi, according to reports, was at the sister's house for several weeks and nobody knew he was there. Until one day, Ataayi and another person in the compound had a problem. There was some altercation, some disagreement between Ataayi and another person on the compound. Immediately, the people discovered that this was Ataayi. Remember, I said Ataayi's face was on large billboard, appeared on TV, newspapers. The face was there on billboards, on several places. The name was mentioned by police, and there was even a prize to who could help them arrest Ataayi. So you could identify him by the face. So they called the police, and when the police arrived, according to reports, Ataayi had washed some clothes and was going to dry them when the police came and then took him. This happened on the 28th February 2005. That was the day the Lord of Armed Robbers in Ghana was arrested. Now, this is what you should know. Upon all the crimes and armed robberies and all the things that Ataayi did, According to him, during an interview at the Ankarfo prison where he currently is, he said that he never shot anybody and he never killed anybody. So during the trial of Ataayi at the court, he said to the court that the police had tortured him and coerced him into admitting to crimes he did not even commit. Also, Ataayi at that particular year was age 32. The court sentenced Ataayi to 160 years in prison with hard labor. So if Ataayi is able to live beyond 160 years, he would be released. Currently, Ataayi is at the Ankarfo prisons at Cape Coast, where according to reports and interviews, Ataayi is currently a repentant Christian, a born-again Christian, and he's currently a man of God in a prison, preaching and giving good advice to other inmates at the prison. He had sought for several pardons from government. However, he is still over there. We hope that he has really changed and that one day he will be given some pardon, because according to him, when he gets out of prison, he hoped to build a church and then shape the life of people in the country.